Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Michael's Record Collection, where we talk about great music with the people who make it and the people who love it. And I'm joined here by someone who makes great music, Ted Leonard. You know him from Enchant. You know him from Spock's Beard. Ted, thank you for your time today.
I'm glad to be here.
You had a new album coming out with Spock's Beard called The Archaeoptimist on November 21st on Madfish Music. And very excited. I've been listening to this recently, and this is an album that is very exciting. It's been a few years since Spock's Beard put something out. But before we dive into that, I want to go back to the beginning for Ted Leonard. What was your first favorite record, Ted?
My first favorite record is going to be it's a Kansas record, and it's going to be one that Kansas fans will guffaw at, and that is Drastic Measures. So at least that's the first one I purchased.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to say my first favorite entire album was actually Journey Escape.
It's a good one. It's one of those ones it's hard to, once you get that for the first time, it's hard to stop playing it.
Yeah, well, and at the time my mom was, in the early 80s, very early 80s. Um, you know, the a lot of, especially a lot of Christian parents were like, they believed everything rock and roll was like from the devil, the devil. Um, and so I used to have to hide that tape, and I thought it was a good idea to hide it outside under this shrub in my front yard. I'll let you guess what happened to that tape. Anyway, it got rained on and didn't really work very well after that. But I had it
Funny.
all memorized. I used to have this recurring fantasy when I was a kid that I'd be going to see Journey and Steve Perry would pass out on stage, and then Neil Sean would get on the mic and say, "Does anybody know all the words?" And I'd be like, "I know all the words." You know, little 11-year-old running up there.
Up you go. Your career as a rock star is now underway.
Yeah.
I see the guitars on the wall. I was curious. I think maybe I know the answer to this, but based on what you said about your folks, but do you come from a musical family? Were there other people around you that played instruments that kind of passed that on to you?
My aunts and uncles and a lot of people on my father's side of the family were very musical. So my aunts all played piano. My mom sang. My grandmother was trained in opera. My grandfather was the director of the church choir. He was so and had this huge uh, I'm sorry. There was just no way to phrase this without sounding inappropriate, but he had this huge organ in his, um, I shouldn't, anyway, this is not going well. So he had this, one of those organs where you had the foot pedals and like 50 million switches up here and he would play that and it was in his front room. It was probably worth more than his house. Um, and, but the funny thing is when grandma would get mad at him, she'd be like, "Oh, grandpa, go play your organ." And the rest of us would be giggling, and she'd have no idea why. But anyway, it still makes me giggle. I'm 54, apparently. It can still make me laugh. So
Yeah, well, your humor, I think you can evolve a little bit, but I think it stays with you your whole life.
pretty much. I mean, I'm still 12 years old with regards to my sense of humor for sure.
So a lot of people know you as the voice of Enchant, and I think even though people have seen you play guitar on stage with that band, I think that some people are, I think, just finding out how accomplished and how good you are on an instrument, but with your work in pattern seeking animals. Is guitar where you started as far as learning music?
No, I mean, the first thing I was ever involved in was church choir. So, I was singing from the get-go. And then borrowed my dad's Epiphone acoustic when I was 16. So I didn't pick up a guitar until I was 16. And at that point, I was already in a band called Revelation, and or had just joined. And I really picked up the guitar with the intent to be able to at least be able to come up with like simple chord progressions and do some writing with it. And then, like everybody else, as soon as you start to get to the intermediate stage, people go one of two ways. They either get frustrated and quit or get completely obsessed. And of course, I went down the route of obsession. And So I, from in my 20s, probably spent more time playing guitar than singing. Um, but yeah, in those early years, and I took those early years were mostly focused on singing, and then I took piano classes and things like that. So and my first guitar instructor was very focused on theory. So came out of the gates, with at least chordal theory knowledge, so I could find my way around a keyboard and that sort of thing. But
It's good. I thought you were going to go another route there. A lot of people tell me they started taking lessons and they hated it, so they stopped taking lessons.
yeah, no, I admit that I did not stay in those particular lessons for long. He was mostly a jazz teacher.
Mm,
But then, being starting guitar at 16 means every musician you come into contact with is further along than you are. So got to absorb a lot from those around me. But also, when I first moved out of my house, moved in with, we had basically our band in the garage, and two bands in the garage. So, and was surrounded by adult, like blues players and jazz players. And so, there's just immersed in it. But, stylistically, I was always from the get-go. I mean, Kansas was my first and favorite band and still is.
mhm.
So I was always interested in the, more complex music, despite the fact that most people know Kansas for their least complex songs. But
Yeah. So you mentioned the album that you first bought from Kansas. I assume that then from that point on, you kind of explored some of the rest of their catalog, and that's kind of what pulled you into the progressive rock world a little bit.
yeah, so the first album was Drastic Measures. The second album was The Best of Kansas. And then that I ever purchased, I was, um, and then I bought everything many times over. You know, you got the vinyl, the CD, I had all the tapes, and uh, and then CDs at least two or three times because it got stolen out of my truck. Um, and and now I don't even have a CD player, so I just
So, how much of your sound would you say? Maybe you don't even know the answer to this question. Would you say is attributable to your natural voice, and how much of it do you think was shaped by singing along with those Kansas albums?
I don't even know if it's possible to delineate between those two because apart from singing in choir, I mean, I cut my teeth. I had older siblings that they were all working when I would get home from school. So I'd be home alone, single parent. I'd be home alone for hours and I would put on a Kansas record, and sing along with it at the top of my voice every day. And so I don't know what my voice is without Kansas. You know what I mean? That's how I learned to sing. And honestly, people draw the Steve Walsh comparison, but I mean those first couple of years were heavily influenced by John Elefante.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of people, I don't think probably make the natural comparison to John Elefante's voice. In a lot of ways, is similar to Steve Walsh's.
Timbre wise, yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would say that timbre wise, but I would say vocal approach, getting in and out of the notes. Um, it's like it's like a more refined version of Steve Walsh in all the good ways. Refinement can apply in all the bad ways too. It's like a little too smooth, and some of those rough edges are where Steve Walsh's charm is. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, but yeah, I spent plenty of time singing along with Steve Walsh though too, and all the tenors back then, Tommy Shaw, Steve Perry, and all those big rock guys too.
Yeah. So it Enchant's last album was in 2014, The Great Divide. Is Enchant still a band at this point?
Well, nobody's called TOD. Um, so so as far as I know, yeah, there's no end of the entity necessarily, but I don't foresee us doing any recording. I think the next, if anything came along, it would be some really adventurous promoter that would like to lose money, put us out there, in a festival or something. But yeah, I mean, it kind of lands on Doug's lap to to blaze, blaze ahead with that. He's been just very much wrapped up in making a living and living his life. So totally get it. I spend 9 hours a day in this room doing everything but music, per day, and sometimes the last thing I want to do is come back in here and try to be creative. So
Understood. Yeah, I know he's working a lot with a lot of different bands, cover bands, and things like that out there in
yeah,
California.
he's just making a living.
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think that's where his heart and soul is. He's also like a DJ at a country club. Um, and I don't think watching a bunch of people do two-step is where his heart's at. But uh,
No,
but
got to
that's
pay the bills.
that's right.
So let's talk a little bit about the Archaeoptimist. This is the 14th studio album from Spock's Beard, the first since Noise Floor in 2018. And I believe, if memory serves, this is your fourth album with Spock's Beard after joining officially as a member in 2011. Um, Again, you guys, probably a lot of guys just making a living at that point. That there's a big gap between Spock's Beard records, and I'm sure we'd all like to know what you guys have been doing in the meantime. Some of you have been doing Pattern Seeking Animals.
Right, we've kept ourselves pretty busy recording wise with Pattern Seeking Animals. Managed to put out 5 albums in the course of this little gap between Spock's albums. Um, and we've got a sixth one that's going to be, probably done by the time we leave. Well, probably be done by early spring. Um, the drums are already recorded. But yeah, the big gap in time had a lot to do with, it was kind of a conscious decision to dial back on recording. And there was recording Noise Floor wasn't easy. I think, and there was some tensions and stuff that just go on sometimes when when four different people want four different outcomes.
Mm.
And so it's just kind of how that record kind of left a bitter taste in everybody's mouth with regard to recording, but none of us felt like we wanted to, pull the plug on playing live, so we would take any and every opportunity to play live. The most recent of which was this 2024 tour that was mostly the UK and then one festival that we played in the Netherlands. And that tour, I think generally, I think there had been a long enough time gap to where we really appreciated each other in a way that maybe we'd started taking for granted. And you get these 5 guys on stage, five including Mike Thorne at the time playing drums for us, but you get five excellent musicians on stage, and these particular ones, they combine for a sum that's greater than any of the parts. It's just, and we all kind of came away from that tour with on kind of a morale high, and it was discussed multiple times. We were all in this Sprinter van on that tour instead of a proper bus because we were just mostly in the UK, just going back and forth between these locations, and
Uh-huh.
and so there was a lot of time for conversations, and so we just started talking about, if we're going to do we should record. We should not just let this brand die or whatever. And we're too good together to just let this to just sit on our laurels. So, what are we going to do differently with this next album? And we kind of established that there needed to be some less role ambiguity. And so we talked about how to approach it, and then got home. I think Rio had already been cooking up a batch of songs for his next solo album, and he just kind of turned a couple of those even further towards Spock's, because if you listen to his solo stuff, it's pretty, there's a lot of commonality
Yeah.
musically. Um, but then he just kind of shifted the focus of this writing towards Spock's, presented the songs to us, and because I thought when we came off tour, it was going to be probably 2 years before we amassed enough material and actually had time to record. And but he came to us with this collection of songs that were all very cohesive, and we liked them. And so it was like, okay, well, let's just do this. If we want more kind of a coordinated or collaborative effort, we'll keep that for the next one. But we've got this group of songs that we, are all enthusiastic about. So let's go ahead and do this. And so it was kind of interesting because Rio's had writing credits at various times since Neil left,
Hmm.
but not a ton. And so to have an album that's predominantly written by him and and Michael Whiteman, who did, I'm presuming, all of the lyrics and melodies. Um, but knowing Rio's style and everything, the music is largely his, I would say. I'm sure Michael contributed there too. Probably at the task of taking two completely different things and finding a way to transition them, is if I know Rio. He writes parts, and so yeah, that's just kind of how it came about. I probably answered like three questions with
You
that,
you
didn't
probably did. You talked about Michael Whiteman from I Am the Manic Whale. He and Rio, of course, collaborated on Rio's recent solo album, The Myth of the Monstrous, which you sang on, and for parts of that. And I was going to ask you, like how much did you work with Michael on the album? But it sounds like Rio and Michael kind of built the skeleton for the rest of you to sort of add on to.
it? Yeah, so when we got the demos, they were pretty well formed. I mean, they were done, and even by the time I got them, they already had Nick's drums on them. So it was all pretty well written. And I got them and got the lyrics, and there was just a stylistic difference between what I would feel comfortable singing and what Michael would write on a couple different occasions. So there was really two songs that where I said these need a full rewrite, lyrically. Everything else, there was so the first song, Invisible, was actually derived from a song that had nothing to do with the subject matter that Al came up with for Invisible. Completely different song that was more kind of in line with like Monstrous. It was going to be about this mythical creature, and I'm just, that's not my bag. And so I was like, we got to do a full rewrite. And then the second song, Electric Monk, was great. It was about a fictional character that I'm unaware of, but some of the phrasings and just in there also I thought needed a reworking. So Al was set to task on both of those, and he's always been a really good lyricist. Um, and when I hadn't really delved into the epic yet, but it was a song called The Destructionist, and it was about a kind of a bullyish political figure. And so I don't know if you can see where this is going.
I can't
Uh,
imagine where you would get kind of that kind of material from.
yeah, so and my understanding was that it was not about anybody specific, but at the same time, it was like I'm not interested in singing about anything political or anything that can even be construed that way,
Right.
regardless of what the inspiration was. So, but I told Rio that I'm like, this needs a full rewrite too. But we're talking about 4.5 pages of lyrics, now. And he's like, well, you got to do it because we don't have much time. And I'm like, okay, well, it was actually a really fun experience. It turned out, I actually just turned off the vocal track and just used it as a reference, the waveform as a reference for, okay, this is where vocals go, and then listened through the track and started crafting a story, which, anybody who's familiar with my writing over the years, I I don't do a whole lot of fiction, you know. It's mostly autobiographical, or or about an experience that somebody else I know has experienced. Very few songs that I can think of that were just straight up fiction. And so this was a departure for me, and it wasn't an intentional departure either. It was like the first few lines were just kind of mumbling, as a lot of songwriters do. You kind of mumble your parts and kind of you almost get phrasing before you get words.
Hmm.
Sometimes the music itself will cause you to go,
Yeah.
and a couple lines came out, and it just started me down a path to write that storyline. And it was a little influenced by the Y files. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there's a particular episode with one of the White Files. This guy he delves into conspiracy theories or just theories in general, not necessarily conspiracy. That that resonate with some truth to them, and he kind of explores how they could be true, and then at the end, kind of disseminates, and at the end, he kind of dispels most of the time.
Yeah.
One of the episodes was on this pole shift theory, which is a proposed explanation for extinction events that have occurred. The most recent of which we know about, in the Younger Dryas, but the suggestion is that we might be on the third or fourth go around with humanity, and that there may have been one 12,000 years ago and then 6,000 years or something like that. Like the cyclical event where the poles shift and the Earth starts rotating the opposite direction, despite the fact that the wind and the water are still moving 1,000 miles an hour in the wrong direction. So you can imagine that doesn't bode well for anybody,
Yeah.
really, except for people who are landlocked, far from oceans on very high, at a very high elevation, like Denver or something. But anyway, so that was the image running through my mind of like what would that be like to be one of those people that had to kind of repopulate the planet or start over. And you know that was kind of the image that was going through my mind. um, and just cooked up a story about a father and daughter going through that. And the daughter has this innately optimistic kind of outlook, and obviously the adults around her have watched civilization literally get wiped off the planet, so not a whole lot of cheeriness going on in that tribe. And so she becomes this kind of source for joy and optimism in the tribe, and has this incessant need to dig around to find like any evidence you can find of the previous civilization that she's heard stories about. I didn't mention it, but she was born after the cataclysmic event. So anyway, that's the basis of the story. And obviously, if you get the lyrics and everything, I wrote context for every section too. So it's really, I think the fans are gonna dig how much, kind of how cinematic it is, especially once you read the context.
Great. It was like a little mini graphic novel, kind of almost.
Yeah, I could see it. I could see someone who's better at long form stories taking it and running. But there's no shortage of post-apocalyptic or cataclysmic, storylines out there. So I
Yeah.
don't know. We'll
Well,
see.
there's always an audience for it. It's anything that will sort of distract us from what's going on in our daily lives. But I'm glad you explained that, because the Archaeoptimist is an interesting title. It's the first thing that you obviously, when you're hit with the album, you go, the Archaeoptimist. What is an Archaeoptimist? What is this? It's very intriguing. It pulls you in immediately. It makes you. It's this mysterious sounding word. It's like, I know what this word means. I know what this prefix means. How do these work together? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't certainly didn't pick it. In fact, the song title was going to be initially it was between that and The Key. Um, but so it certainly wasn't like the song title wasn't, I didn't realize it was going to be the album title at the time, but I think everybody kind of liked it for that reason because it was going to make people go, "What? What is that?" And it's just it's the father's pet name for his daughter. It's like a joke name he has this for his daughter. Um, so so anyway, makes more sense once in the context.
Yeah. So you guys, we're used to you putting out music albums on Inside Out. You're on Madfish now. What has that been like to make that transition?
So it was a bit of a forced transition, as was the PSA's transition over to whatever we're on now. I should probably know that.
It's
That's
a
probably
Giant
that's
Electric P, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. That sounds very uh, lacking in gratitude to not know the name offhand. But anyway, I am very
You're in multiple bands. You get a pass on this.
I am grateful to those guys. But anyway, these guys have been wonderful. We I kind of saw the writing on the wall with when when Inside Out started their affiliation with Sony, that eventually Sony would maybe tire of putting out these albums that are to such a specific niche, and um, and so at some point we were informed that they weren't going to be picking up the option to make more albums, and
Mhm.
we had to go find someone else and kind of just looked for the best deal. I mean, these days it used to be that you look for a combination of who has the best, funding available for promotion, first of all. Maybe not even first of all. First of all would be distribution, and second of all would be who's willing to spend the most to get it out there. These days it's like obviously the distribution is almost inconsequential at this point. Um, with every genre other than prog, really. I mean, prog fans are still buying physical CDs, and we're very grateful for that. But it's a lot of labels have shifted their focus to, monetizing in other ways, obviously. So we just looked for a label that was, going to give us a reasonable amount of money up front to produce the album. And these guys have been really good, been really very thorough with setting up interviews and setting, all these the promotion that's necessary. My schedule's been pretty full. I've been like the ipso facto spokesperson for this album. So I've had a lot of, interviews already, and there's plenty more on the schedule. But so these guys have been doing a wonderful job of putting all that together and getting the word out. And they've been great to work with basically in every regard. So it's sometimes that's the, you know, in business too, and sometimes that's the advantage of going with someone who's smaller, and there's going to be a little bit more, you know, person-to-person interaction, or a little bit more, favor or attention, um, given to the client in this case.
Yeah. A little more
Um,
hands-on, a little more personal touch from them.
right.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we
full
couldn't be happier.
disclosure, I have to say that I requested you or Alan because I had Rio and Dave on the show recently. So
Yeah. Yeah, I
that's
haven't.
my fault.
No, 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 no. I've been doing all of them. That was kind of decided.
Okay.
Some people have requested those other guys. It's like, nope, you got me. So,
Well, that's, as far as consolation prizes go, that's pretty good. Pretty good. But yeah, it was just interesting, but I get it, Sony, big company, they're not going to have as much of a, gratitude or a feel an obligation to the progressive rock community as somebody that's been doing that for years, and specifically catering to that audience. So I can certainly understand that. I wanted to ask you about the newest member of Spock's Beard. Nick Potter is officially a member of the band. What does he bring to the band in terms of his own personal style that sort of augments Spock's Beard?
I think augments is a perfectly chosen word in this case because, the material itself had its own energy to it. But what Nick brought to it was an augmentation of that energy. I mean, there is a lot of energy behind the drum kit throughout this album, and that's partly Rio's doing too, because Nick is a studio guy, and he's always being told to less is more. And Rio is like, more is more. So, and so he was just constantly going, yeah, that's great. Do more. So he had basically carte blanche to overplay basically. And which I don't think is overplaying in this particular context. It's actually appropriate. But probably compared to every other musical endeavor he's done, this he probably felt like it was overplaying. Between that and the fact that he's an excellent singer, and has perfect pitch, which obviously contributes to being a good singer, but he has the kind of perfect pitch where if you play a very complex and dense chord, he's going to be able to tell you every note that you just played. He's got that kind of perfect pitch, and so it's handy to have around in the rehearsal studio, which I've only been that's only occurred for one day, but or maybe it was two. We had a couple days of rehearsal before doing one show with him at Alva's back in 2024 after our European leg.
Mm.
Um, and he was great, man. He just nailed it. And all the harmonies were just like, oh, perfect. It's like, oh, we finally found a guy named Nick who could play drums and sing really well. Um, because
Yeah, poor Spocks. Between Nick and Jimmy, nobody that can drum or sing.
yeah, and and Mike held his own too with the
Yeah, yeah.
singing, although he was never, never purported to be a singer's singer. Whereas Jimmy and Nick are easily lead quality. Well, obviously Nick's the lead quality singer, and so is Jimmy. If you ever heard his solo album or any clips, yeah, they're both great singers. Nick Potter's is he's actually a baritone, but he's got a super strong falsetto with like really good pitch in that part of his range. So it works great. So he can sing above me without, sounding strange or whatever. So which is, I'm already singing high half the most of the time. So
Yeah, you can get up there. You can get up there. Um, this is probably my OCD a little bit talking here, but one thing that does bother me, and
here it comes.
I wanted to ask about it. Was it the label's idea to split up the title track on the vinyl version? Um, because there's like 4 minutes of the Archaeoptimist is on side four, uh, rather than putting it all together. And I know there's sound quality. They wanted to keep the sides short so that the sound quality would be better.
Is it, should I be embarrassed to admit that this is the first I'm hearing of that?
No, no, not at all, because that probably answers the question right there. It's probably up to the record
Definitely not
company.
it was definitely, I don't know. Rio may have been aware of it, and he may have even decided the cut point. I would imagine. Um, there is, so where does it cut?
I don't know. I don't know the exact moment because I haven't heard the vinyl version, but it's about 4 minutes of the end of the track is on side four. The rest, the first 17 minutes or whatever it is on side three.
Is there a lot of extra room on side four then? Because there's really after that there's only like a 7 minute song, right? So
Yeah, it's next step I think is on it on the side four with the last 4 minutes. So I think
huh.
you got about 14 minutes or so on the
I'd be
full track.
interested to know where they cut it and whether we had a hand in that. Because I can think right off the bat of an obvious cut point. There's actually a point where the volume goes down to nothing, and then there's this sound effect, this kind of timed sound that warbling,
Mhm.
kind of thing. That would have been a great cut point, and I'm sure it would have fit just fine on one side of the album. That would have made a lot more sense than the last 4 minutes, because the last 4 minutes there's constantly something going on,
Yeah,
so that's weird.
yeah. All right. Well, obviously you didn't know that, but I do think you probably know about the great uh deluxe edition that they're selling. It's red vinyl, and you got the CD as well, and you also get a DVD and surround sound. Have you heard the surround sound mixes?
Mm-mm. I have
Um,
not. In fact, I don't have a CD or an LP yet either. So I have the actual, the masters on, but like high bitrate MP3 masters. So I've got everybody else is getting the treatment before I get it,
you're hearing it how I heard it.
which is, it sounds great. I mean, Rich
It
is
does.
Rich. Rich is
Yeah.
amazing. And it doesn't matter what room you put him in to do the mixing, apparently, because he still does a great job with, even though he had to start over with his studio.
Yeah, I was going to ask it. Did that get mixed before his studio burned down, or is that in his new place?
No, well after. Yeah, we weren't even starting to record when that happened. In fact, that I think that happened right around the time we were touring in 2024. No, let's see. It would have been early summer. Anyway, it was, yeah, that was tragic. I mean, everybody was just like, "Oh, dude, did you hear?" Because the Mouse House was just it was epic.
Legendary. I mean, so many great albums came out of that studio.
Yeah, and it was just, a great space. uh, sound wise for recording. And it was actually a fun place to stay. He had a couple like, bunk beds set up for when the band was going to be in town for successive days. And so I'd stayed there a number of times. Um, which was great because when everybody went home, there was this room of just classic amps that I would go in there, and he probably wondered why some of his classic amp speakers were blown. It's probably my fault. No, they were. He had this old silver tone that was so cool, and this old Vox AC30, and when everybody would go home, I would just crank it up and rock out. I would keep it was like a vacuum sealed door, this big thick door, more soundproof. But anyway, I would have it barely cracked open so I could crank the amp without like destroying the neighborhood. But it was, but it was, oh, it was a great place, man. It was such a bummer.
So, do you have a favorite song on the album? I mean, there's only 6 tracks, but is there? I mean, you probably have a little bit of affinity for the title track since it you wrote the lyrics to it.
Yeah, I would obviously, yeah, I would say that like I think that's got pretty much everything in it, as well as, the classic, vocal um counterplay that we do, the Gentle Giant thing. But if I had to pick another song that would definitely be in the number two position, um I would actually say, the Electric Monk or Next Step are kind of tied for me. Next steps. Um, I think I think because vocally they both stretch me in a different way, and I really love how the vocal turned out on those. I hate to sound like all self-centered, but um, but I love the end of Electric Monk because it's kind of a side of me that hasn't really shown its face in Spock's, although I've shown that side of my singing, that kind of lighter, breathy, airy thing. Um, in Pattern on a number of occasions. But it was funny when I did that. Al called. He's like, "Dude, I've never heard you sing like that." I'm like, "Because you've never heard a Pattern Singing Animals album." Like, and so you just admitted it by saying that.
Yeah, you told on yourself.
Yeah,
So I think Spock's Beard fans that have been around since the beginning are gonna like a lot of this album. The next step you just mentioned, it's got the Mellotron wash sounds. You've got obviously you got the next song in the Thoughts series with Afterthoughts. You get those classic beep, beep sounds,
right.
that we're used to.
Yeah, there
Um,
was a few moments where Rio was pretty blatant about what he was referring to. Even the beginning of Next Steps is like, "Oh, doorway," you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. But I think that's good because what you have is you've tied the new Spock's beard to the classic Spock's beard, and even though you can't plagiarize yourself, you're just using stuff that you guys have always done.
Right. Well, you can. You can because there's two different writers. But yeah, I mean, you got to steer clear of chord progressions and things like that. But sound wise, it was definitely a hearkening. It was definitely a purposeful, reference back to. There was a couple. There was what's the song that has a cakewalk by oh, I think that is boom 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 boom. Um,
There's I think
that's
there's some
thoughts. Or that's gibberish. Is that gibberish?
yeah,
I think that's
Afterthoughts has
gibberish.
stuff from Thoughts Part 1. Um and I think there are some older sounds from Spock's in Invisible.
Oh, yeah, that's actually those sounds are reference to the original thoughts. That boom, 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 sorry. But then there's a cakewalk uh, on Easy Street reference too on one of the songs. And now it's slipping my mind. I think it's Saint Jerome, where the beginning of that it's like, oh, that's cakewalk, or at least it's
Yeah,
referring to it.
I think you're
Obviously
right.
not the same notes. But yeah, I kind of liked that. I think some people would be like, "Well, what are you doing?" And I thought to me it was kind of like I always loved it the way Sting would refer back to earlier lyrics, like in the outro of his songs.
Mhm.
You know, I have to tell a story of 1,000 rainy days since we
Yeah,
first.
yeah. Yeah. And Rush, when Rush did a Far Cry, Rush fans loved that they used the chord from Hemispheres. They loved it.
Right.
That's like all you read on the message boards where they used it. They used the Hemispheres chord. So I think it's risky, but I think Spock Spirit fans are gonna like those little nods to the band's past.
And then they occur pretty quickly and then depart
Yeah.
from And then the rest of Rio's writing, even if the sounds are familiar, which there's a lot of familiarity with the mellotrons, and you can't get away from organ and mellotron sounds and having that tied to Spock's earlier sound. But at the same time, the chord progressions and the just kind of the approach that Rio has much more of like a fusion or jazz element than I think any Spock's has been largely major or natural minor, and not a whole lot of outside melodies or chord progressions that require a melody to be, like even the Archaeoptimist, the first verse, trying to cook up a melody that sounded to my ears melodic was tough against that chord progression, and but it made it. I think that's what made it so interesting to me. Um, And I think that's why I look forward to, I look forward to doing another album and actually relying a lot more on Rio from a musical standpoint and trying to keep all of the vocals and everything in-house personally. So, that's the hope.
Yeah. I did want to ask you too about your solo album, because I think that is something that a lot of people may not know about, but I feel like as an artist, this is something that, having followed your career for a long time, I thought that your solo album was in a lot of ways a very brave album. The album's called Way Home, came out in '07, I think. And this was you like at your most personal and laying out your faith and beliefs right out there in the open. This was a very honest album, self-reflective album. And I just wondered if you have, now that you've had a chance to kind of look back on that, how you look back on that solo album, and whether or not a second Ted Leonard solo album would be something you'd be thinking about.
It's something I've always thought about. I think in the last 10 years, my professional life has gotten so busy that a lot of stuff has been kind of cast to the wayside, unfortunately. But I do think about doing another solo album someday. As far as how that one's aged on me, I can't say I listen to it often, but I do break it out every once in a while, and usually torturing my wife with it. Just driving if we have a long drive. I'm like, hey, let's listen to me. And like she doesn't get enough of that. Um, but I always get to the end of it. I'm like, man, that was really good. I should do more of that stuff. And yeah, at the time, it was, I never really, there was only really one song that was really brazen about faith. And for the most part, it was pretty subtle. I mean, as Christian albums go,
Yeah.
it was pretty subtle. There was the one song, geez. Anyway, but yeah, there was really one song that was pretty blatant. The rest of them, like even the song "Way Home," was more of just kind of an introspection. Just like
Mm-hmm.
kind of like Michael Jackson's "Man in the Mirror." It's like maybe I should pull the twig out of my eye before dealing with the log in my neighbor's, and that sort of thing. And even like Submerged came from that album.
Mm-hmm.
So I was working on a second solo album and had a lot of demos for it. It's about 7 or 8 demos for it, all of which Nick DiVirgilio had already played drums on and was getting ready to. I would already put the money out for him to play on it, and was already, getting ready to kind of put the finishing touches on it when I got the call from Al to join Spock's. And so some of those, I mean, a lot of those songs have showed up in one form or another. There was this one era, this 6 month span where I wrote like, I don't know, 15 songs. And I've never been as prolific as the Neil Morses or the John Bagholds out there.
Who
Uh,
has?
but I was going through a divorce, going through this really rough time, and just a lot of creativity kind of came out of that. And so I had this whole just big collection of really depressing divorce songs, and but uh, but a lot of them made it onto a Spock's album. I think one of them made it onto an Enchant album, the Enchant album that happened between those times. Um, and a couple of them made it on Pattern Seeking Animals albums. I think all but two have made their way onto a recording. So Hiding Out was one from that era, and it
Okay.
made it onto the first album that your shirt bears the album cover of. And then obviously Submerged was rehashed from the solo album, but that wasn't from that era. But then Minion from Oblivion Particle was from that era. And if I listed all the songs, which would bore the heck out of your listeners, and then you listen to them and like pull out the lyrics, you'd be like, oh yeah, this is depressing divorce stuff. Minion of the Citadel was like feeling like my ex-wife little pawn, a little servant, which is kind of the dynamic. At least that's how I felt at the time. I don't really look back at it that way now, but at
Yeah.
the time, that's how I kind of. Anyway, so yeah, there was a lot of material like that. Just in case she listens to this, I think I'm just going to dial back on that entire part of the conversation because we're very good friends now. So
That's good. That's always good. So yeah, the album Way Home, if people are thinking about maybe giving it a try, I can say that if you're I I kind of just poking fun. I call some people Jesus phobes, the one that can't follow Neil down his religious path. The Jesus phobes will not find this to be overly, um, in your face about your faith and that kind of thing. But it is an introspective and a very honest album, and that's kind of what I think is appealing about it, is that this is look at Ted Leonard, the guy that you've known for years from Enchant, and now you know from Pattern Seeking Animals and Spock's Beard. But I think um, it's it seems to me, and I don't know how you feel about it, but it seems to me an important album in your back catalog.
yeah, I mean, if there's nothing like doing something for which nobody else has really any say in it. And so like in some ways it was probably the most real expression of where I was at musically at the time. It's funny, if I did it now, I'd probably do it totally different. I think it probably well, I was really into John Mayer and at the time. And when I listen back to it, I'm like, yep, that's a John Mayer. Like the whole the the that's totally like a John Mayer thing.
Mm,
So but at the time, yeah, so I wasn't really trying to be big rock at all. It was a lot of breathy kind of mid-range vocals and stuff.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, some really good songs on that album. I definitely should do it again if I ever get. So I always joke with my wife, I'm like, something really horrible's got to happen in my life before I can crank out 10 songs in a few months again. So I've
Well,
had
we hope
plenty.
that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But
Maybe I could write a happy song one of these days instead of songs about the end of the world. And
yeah. Well, at least you're not singing about a kaiju monster that's tearing up Basingstoke or whatever Rio's Rio's song was. But that was entertaining too. They all
please don't eat me now. Yeah, that's
yeah.
I had a hard time getting through the recording of that. I'm doing it from home. And I'm like, please don't name me now. I'm trying to sing it with like seriousness.
Yeah.
I'm like, and there were so many takes where I'm like, just laughing and stuff, which I
Yeah.
probably shouldn't admit on a
Well, it's
recorded
great. I
record.
mean, I kind of had fun with Rio when he was on the show. We were specifically talking about that album, and it was fun because he says, you got to write a big, I'm from Japan. It's part of our culture. We have to, we embrace this. It's the silliness and all of it. And it was
Yeah,
great
but
because
about a big, it's a little on the nose for a Japanese keyboardist to be writing on that. But
yeah.
but yeah, so the song Invisible was a kind of a similar creature, but it killed people with its flatulence.
Oh, that's
So
fun.
and the big hook in the chorus was, I'm gonna stay upwind of you, and I was supposed to sing that. I'm gonna I'm gonna stay upwind of you. And I was like, No, I'm not going to be. I'm
I,
not putting that on the recording.
it's hard to
But
believe you weren't comfortable singing about that.
so so anyway, but Michael's got. I think Michael is got has got like a lot of inspiration from quirky literature and maybe even you know uh, yeah, I don't know, but literature that I'm not privy to or not exposed to.
Yeah.
So so the rest of the material is great and amazing. I don't want to come off like I'm sounding disparaging at all. It just wasn't our style, you
Yeah.
know.
No, you're not. That's if you listen to this album, it's Spock's Beard all the way. But again, like you mentioned, there are some new flavors in there because the writing, heavier lift was done by Rio and by Michael. And but you're not going to come away from this going, wow, that's completely different for Spock's Beard. You're gonna hear Spock's Beard sounds with maybe a little bit of different direction, but
I'd say
it's a
I'd say it's a different direction than the musically than than the three albums prior that I'd been
yeah,
on that always had moments of harkening back, but none so I would say blatantly,
yeah,
that's a lot of the moments on this album, which I love because I'm just like the rest of us, I'm a huge fan of those Neil era albums and stuff. So
yeah. There's a freshness to it, but there's also a familiarity. But you guys don't lean into the familiarity to the point where it becomes like self parody or whatever. I think
that's a good summation, I
you
think.
spend an appropriate amount of time. It's just a nod, something for the fans, and I think it works really well. So the Archaeoptimist comes out November 21st. There's a lot of different ways you can order it: digitally, CD, vinyl, colored vinyl, and various different packages. You can go to the Madfish shop at Burning Shed. I'm sure there's other places. It's going to be available everywhere, like you guys' music always is. So, Ted, when somebody buys this album, plays it start to finish, what do you want them to take away from that experience? What is the lasting feeling you want them to have after listening to this album?
Well, well, optimism being one, I think the last few songs kind of they not on purpose, but just by mistake, they all kind of lean that way. That there is reason to be hopeful towards the future of music. There's a reason to be hopeful towards the future of everything with the correct outlook, or at least with a slight outlook adjustment, maybe for most of us. Um, and let the energy get in you. It's I don't know if that's the best way to phrase it, but just let me inside you. No, I'm just okay. That's why I'm not writing another anyway. So that's the kind of phrases that might come out of my mouth. But no, I mean, just I think that the energy of this we come off as a much younger enterprise than we are, and I hope it kind of reinvigorates the listener as much as it did me just while recording it, you know.
Yeah, I know you've got some tour dates for this in 2026 in Europe. So once again, the European fans get all the prog, and those of us here in the U.S. we don't get so much.
Yeah. Well, I know it's a bummer. The road is it's hard.
It is.
It's hard to cost out in America. It's
Yeah.
just, so it's a lot of festivals, and if you can do, one-offs here and there, that would be one thing, but you kind of have to do those where all your equipment is. You can't
Yeah, yeah. And
it's
I know we've lost some of our festivals here in the country over the last decade. So we don't
yeah, a
have
lot of
not as
people.
many choices now for you guys.
But next year we can hit up Tom and Rob and maybe do a prog stock like PSA just did. So
That'd be great. That'd be great. Ted Leonard, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for telling me about the Archaeoptimist, and I hope it does really well for you. And again, best of luck with it.
all right, thank you so much, Michael.